ladies and gentlemen, this is internet personality Vangelus, returning to O'Neill Design's Glyos system to discuss the mechanical mirrors of my initial coverage. We'll be looking at the Buildmen and Phaseons, also known as Gendrones and Bean Bots respectively, as well as one more freewheeling add-on component. Debuting in January of 2009, the Buildman was specifically created to bear almost no building dead ends. While the Travelers could do some basic part swapping, the Buildman is a miniature build sandbox. For starters, he has 4 effective and mostly intentional head options. One is a large, bug-eyed cranium that uses the first male-to-male connector in the Glyos system as its separate neckpiece. Another can use that same neck to provide a smaller, visor-like monitor head. Third is the most humanoid, being modeled on classic visor helmets like Samus Aran or the Master Chief. It can also be rotated to reveal another bug-eyed face, if you can see it that way. Finally, the central hub of the Buildman's backpack can be used as another believable head, albeit a little bit more abstract, kinda like a robot beak thing. Also contained on the Buildman's backpack are 2 cylinder drums that can be used as limb extensions, cannon hands, or whatever else you can imagine. And that's really the key: imagination. Another review once compared the Buildman to a plastic Rorschach test, and I'm inclined to agree. It's made of 18 completely unique parts, resulting in a permanently asymmetrical hybrid of an action figure and building toy. At $4 for an unpainted Buildman, that is a pretty good value proposition. Painted and detailed ones tend to run for $8, but usually look quite cool, and often represent the various forms of Argen, an enigmatic character who is integral to the sparse fiction of the Glyos universe. The other average-sized robot in Glyos is the Phaseon. Initially released as the Beantown Bean Bot, it received a new dome-like head and midsection spacer to change from a cutesy spoon-riding robot into a spooky and retro silicon soldier. At 14 components and potentially symmetrical, it's a bit less interesting than the Buildman, but can make for a cool companion piece. The thin arms and legs add some interesting build potential, though they also are easy to bend out of shape. The PVC is durable, so it's not risky to fix, but it can mess with build ideas unless you can bust out a hairdryer and straighten that stuff up. Speaking of their Beanbot predecessors, those fun-loving robots came with really quirky spoon racer accessories that included some free-spinning wheels. Wheels with familiar connection pegs. Sold by the foursome for a mere $2, the Glyos wheels are really inexpensive and can open up the possibility of outright rolling vehicles in your Glyos build experience. Available in black, white, gray, or smoky clear gray at the time of this recording, their slick finish has a surprising amount of grip, and the dome shape actually helps these things freewheel even when they're cocked at slightly different angles. Using them can be as simple as jamming them onto a Buildman, and bending it backwards and making it look a little bit weird, but you can get as creative as you like. The main downside is that they have exactly one male peg and nothing else. I wish there was a wheel that could go between 2 parts as well. Like, have a male peg on either side, or a female peg on either side, or a male peg and then put a female peg as a hubcap, or something like that. It's much like the Traveler. The basic posability on this guy is confined to swivel joints wherever parts come together. On the Phaseon, this is super simple. You can kind of spin his little dome around, if you can imagine part of it being the front. His shoulders move, these parts swivel around, you can diddle this stuff if you really want to. He's got a waist swivel and ab swivel, I guess, and he can also just move the whole around. See, I guess he has a posable belly button, and his hips move like this, and then his more or less cylindrical feet can turn for whatever reason. So the Phaseon is a bit less interesting on his own. Let's put him aside for now. But the Buildman, this guy, he's got the basic Traveler posability of, you know, the shoulders, the wrists, the neck, the waist, the hips, and then the swivel at the slightly bent knees, which means that, and the swivel at the foot, which means that if you want, much like the Traveler, you can take the slightly bent knee, turn it around backwards, and then have it as a slightly, I guess, more hero stance straightened leg, so that this guy can stand on his own and maybe be a bit less tippy, because his backpack does make him a bit tippy if you leave it on. But I'm leaving this on because I want to show you there are a couple different ways you can orient the Buildman. I mean, like, he is made for building. I was talking about wheels, or at least I think I was. If I didn't, then I'm going to. And this dude is a Buildman with wheels on. he's pretty much the same. That's less interesting. Oh, he does transform, though, I should mention. This is pretty amazing, guys. Because you can put him like this, and then he's a Buildman car. You know, you can... Yeah. Alright, so this is a Buildman who's just had all of his parts rearranged. His backpack is only this now, and everything else has been moved around to his kind of cannon arm. So posability-wise, it's not very much different, but this does show you some of the options that can come into play. Now, let's say you start working in those axis joints from the Traveler video. A Buildman in one set of axis joints can yield you one of these things. This thing's kind of crazy looking, and thanks to the axis joints, it does have a tad bit more posability at the shoulders and hips. These builds I'm showing you primarily are ones that were shown on the blog on the Glyos site. So there are, of course, other builds you can do, but for simplicity's sake, I figured I'd just show you some of this stuff. Here's another Buildman. This one has a scarf. That's a new thing that we'll talk about some other day. But he's also got just one axis joint in place, so he doesn't have axis jointed hips, but he's got axis jointed knees and axis shoulders. So he's kind of a cool build idea as well. He's a bit lankier, and thanks to the axis knees, he's able to look more like he's kind of just walking or looming kind of silently in the background. Now, one other cool build that was actually sold like this on the site was this version of Argen, where he's got one axis joint in place, and much like this one, it gives him axis shoulders and then, like, axis knees. The thing I like about this build on Argen is that even though he's not superposable, he's got, like, this bent elbow built in, and everything on him is kind of based on angles. So you've got like this forward and backward swivel here, then an angular swivel that can be moved to any position on his arm. So you can kind of mess around a bit and have him cross his arm or his gun arm in front of his chest or stuff like that. So he also has just kind of a cool and unique silhouette that you can put together. Now, this is all with one axis set. You can also use two axis sets, and now you've basically got a posable action figure based on the Buildman. This guy has got ball-jointed, well, not ball-jointed, but angular cuts and horizontal and vertical cuts on his shoulders and his hips. He's got knee joints, and I love the aesthetic of this dude because he also just looks like a really nicely shaped bipedal robot. He's got a nicely filled out form. He's got these little kind of tonfa weapon things you can swivel out. He's got a decently sized backpack. Looks kind of like a jetpack. So this was a really neat build. I actually had to get Baltan2 on Twitter to help me put this one together, and some other folks to get more of these gold axis joints. This guy sold out fast, but the Buildman is more or less a really cool basis, as you can see, for a lot of different build ideas. The Phaseon is not necessarily unable to take part in that. One of the cool basic builds that came out for this guy was taking a Phaseon, and then you grab a pair of phase arms and Gobon blasters, as was also seen in the Traveler video, and you get this little Phaseon Centurion, who just looks like a bigger and more built for war kind of Lieutenant Phaseon. So, between all this stuff, there's lots of options right out of the gate, which are pretty simple and all visually represented on the blog. So I kind of dig just how the simple act of changing silhouettes by adding shoulder pads or stuff like that, or you know, taking a bunch of axis joints and filling out this guy to look like he's maybe bulked out a little bit more, and you get the practical meta addition of more posability. All that stuff is part of what makes the Buildman so valuable to me in terms of how I got more into this Glyos stuff. Now, you can also just start mushing all of this stuff together as well. If you take a Buildman and you give him a pair of axis joints and you just kind of throw one of these dudes together, let's smush them together a whole bunch, and then we'll color them purple, and hey look, it's Argen Rig Killer. So this is a Buildman, two sets of axis joints, and one of those Phaseons all put together in somewhat shockwave-looking colors in order to have this dude who looks like he could basically wreck stuff. The way that Matt designed this, the elbow joint here is a bit easy to dislodge. There was one that recently came out in ROM Space Knight colors that I found was a bit more solid on the elbow, but that one was pre-built. This is the one I tried building myself, and I found it's just a bit difficult to swivel his arm around. He's got the whole backpack set up here, which is kind of like a jetpack again. And this was a cool thing to see on the blog, because it's kind of depressing to say, but there are a lot of combinations I just don't think of until someone else does it. That's kind of one of the natures of Glyos, is unless you're a really gifted builder of this stuff, you're mostly just going to see other people do things and then kind of mush different people's ideas together, and there's nothing wrong with that. But one thing I did, just to close out this little part of the review, is when I first got Glyos, I got Buildmen and axis joints and wheels and phase arms and whatnot, and the very first full big build I made without looking at what other people did was this guy. This is... I can't even remember how many parts are in this dude, but this is what I called, what did I call this guy? Right, I called him an auto centaur, because he transforms, but that's besides the point right now. This is to show you that you can really take everything, like wheels and all that kind of stuff, and now that we're into the second video of this Glyos review series that I'm doing, start just mashing everything together, and you start to see just how robust this building system can get, even with only a few certain elements in place. Like, some cool ideas you can figure out are how to do feet with ankle tilts. In this case, it's two axis spheres put together with a traveler arm and a bit of a phase arm put in here as a heel support. So, really, just if you do start picking this stuff up, let your imagination run wild, and go nuts. This guy was the result of just sitting down, watching some stuff, and mushing Glyos together until it formed shapes that I thought looked cool. So, have a go at this guy. Sometime I'll show how this guy transforms. He just turns into basically a torso in a go-kart. But I was very proud of myself when I figured all that stuff out and realized what Glyos can do. So, to me, the Auto Centaur is always going to be kind of my Glyos muse. I've tweaked him here and there. I switched in a Buildman head with a red visor because I got one in a bag. Anyway, that's a whole lot of yammering about Buildmen, so let's move on. While the Travelers show the potential of Glyos as a build toy, the Buildmen were the figures to tear the concept wide open, hence their name. They are easily one of the best standalone bang-for-your-buck Glyos purchases, even without extras like axis joints. Personally, I think a Buildman, 2 axis joints, and 2 phase arms is a great affordable Glyos starter kit to see what the line's all about. The Phaseons and wheels are also cool, but definitely not the top-tier entries of the line. They're great add-on pieces, but I would not recommend them as a first purchase. And just to reiterate, these toys have been made in a lot of colors, not to mention a large variety of paint-detailed schemes and custom releases. And there will probably be more colors to come. Buildmen specifically are almost always available, at least in some kind of unpainted form. So while it may be hard to get at some of the versions I've shown here, there will be more in the future. Or you can just customize your own. Become super pro and make millions. Millions. Anyway, this has been Internet Personality Vangelus, and that completes the coverage of the basics of the Glyos system. The classic basics, at least. Now we'll move into some of the more specialized or unique entries in the line, as well as the newer core figures that stand alongside what we've seen so far in enhancing the potential of this plastic series.